If you were around on the weekend, you would have seen a whole bunch of posts, tweets, videos about the Cardano Testnet being catastrophically broken. The influencers online were confused. Isn't this what a testnet is for? You are there to break the testnet and make things fail there. And other influencers are asking, okay, so the Cardano community is all up in arms about their testnet being broken, but people are okay with the Solana mainnet breaking every month. There's all sorts of questions around that. And stake pool operators were also confused. Do we upgrade our nodes now to the latest version to support Vasil hard fork? Do we wait? Do we need more testing? A lot of questions were being asked. But thankfully, the community pulled together over the weekend and did everything they could, worked late nights to do all the testing that was necessary to ensure that latest version of the Cardano node was working properly and as expected, with different versions of the Cardano node running and being able to run that latest version as well, and all the blocks propagating as they should. So we're still on track to upgrade and roll out the Vasil hard fork as required to leapfrog Cardano's DeFi ecosystem to the next level. Now, this is what I want to talk about in this episode. I have Ben Hart, the head of Cardano operations at MLABS. They're a consultancy firm that are building so many of the projects in the Cardano ecosystem. And he's joining me on this episode to talk about the Vasil hard fork, all these Cardano improvement proposals that are in there and how they will impact, how they work and how they will impact the Cardano ecosystem as well. So I really enjoyed this one because I got to learn a lot more about these SIPs, these Cardano improvement proposals, to get a better understanding of what they actually are. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more, I have all of this written up on the show notes for this episode, and you can get to it at learncardano.io/EP058. There you find all the show notes and everything that we mentioned in this particular interview, as well as links to all the Cardano improvement proposals too. All right, let's get into this interview. I have Ben Hart joining me on this episode to talk about the Vasil hard fork. We're going to learn a little bit more of the intricacies, what is coming out in it, why we should be paying attention, and how this is going to affect the DeFi landscape for the Cardano ecosystem as well. So I'm pretty excited to have Ben on the podcast episode to talk all about this. Ben, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So you want to talk a little bit about Vasil?
Yeah. We've read a lot of blogs about this. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of talk about it. But what actually is in it, and why should people be excited about it?
Right. So there's three major changes that are coming in Vasil. I mean, there's others, but these are the ones that are most particularly relevant to DeFi, and I'd say the DApp ecosystem in general. So the most critical one is this idea of a reference input. So this can be a piece of information. And the way Cardano works right now, if you want to reference some just stored information on the chain, so this might be to unlock a couple of, like a UTXO, which is sort of like a parcel of funds, right? So right now, if you ever want to use that particular UTXO, because it might also contain some information that is vital. Right now, you have to kind of hide it away from everybody else for 20 seconds until the next block lands. And this makes it very difficult to create complex DeFi systems on chain. It was really hard to do DEXs, and you can see nothing much more complex than a DEX is really shipped yet. So this could do something like, for a lending market or a stable coin, being able to take a look at Oracle results that would tell us the latest USD price, for example, or just being able to have everybody's transactions just reference an interest rate at the same time. This sort of unlocks all of that behavior and a lot more.
Wow, okay.
So that it just really increases the expressiveness of what you can do on chain, and more complex systems become possible in an easier way.
So oracles wouldn't be possible without these reference inputs at all?
Yeah, I would say oracles are quite tricky to do. without these. This is going to make oracles, I think, much more straightforward.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So what else is in it?
Yeah.
You said there were three major ones.
That's the first one. Now, the others are more convenient for developers, I would say, and they kind of help us get away from some restrictions on chain. So the second big change is inline datum. Right now, you can have a UTXO or like a parcel of funds that has some data attached to it. And right now, they're sort of separate. It kind of references it. And this actually is the cause of a whole bunch of off-chain infrastructure that someone who's building a dApp has to run just to sort of store all of this information and have it available off-chain. And it kind of goes against the idea of running a smart contract on the layer one if everything is kind of stored off-chain. Now, most of this information can be queried from the chain. It's just a bit slow. So what we're doing is, instead of having these sort of pointers to the data, we're actually having the data directly available right next to the funds on that UTXO. This makes design a whole lot simpler for sort of the architecture of the app, and it means that there's a lot less sort of infrastructure everybody's got to build up, because you can much more quickly get what you need from the chain to process a transaction.
Yeah. How does that compare to other chains such as Ethereum? Because I've heard a lot of talk about data availability in regards to this.
Right.
And there's different arguments of how things are done.
So Cardano handles data in a really different way than Ethereum. In Ethereum, you might have a payload attached to a transaction, whereas the actual storage of data on chain is sort of parceled up, much more like how Bitcoin would handle it on Cardano, because we share so much in common architecturally. So it's not quite, you could call it sort of two sides of the same coin, of being able to try to get this common state that's needed for different transactions around the chain, bits of data everywhere. So then we have this third CIP. This third CIP allows for reference script. So it sort of builds on this idea of reference inputs that we had earlier. But instead, we're actually able to just store a script on chain and essentially point back to it. So we were sort of attaching these scripts in every single transaction. It made the transactions really big. Now we're going to have on-chain script storage. And this is a big feature that they do have on Ethereum. The on-chain script storage is really, it allows us to just sort of point to this bit of script on chain. And that way the smart contract essentially lives there, and you don't have to include it in every single transaction. So you get much, much smaller transactions from space and in other restrictions as well.
That's something I always noticed when playing around with Ethereum. Like, I could always go to an explorer and find the actual contract and browse it. So Ethereum already had something like that in place for a long time, right? And now we're just doing something similar.
Well, it's funny. The scripts are stored on chain, but it's not like you go to one address and that's where the script is. That's what's coming.
Yeah.
But here, what you do right now on Cardano is you'd look up the transaction, and then through various tools, you can actually dig up the CBOR of the transaction, decode the CBOR, and then you'll get something. It's sort of like a bytecode, but it's actually the untyped Plutus core representation of the script.
Right. Okay. So at the moment,
you can get that, but it's very different from Ethereum.
Yeah. A lot more digging to do. So at the moment, all of these scripts have to be placed into a block with the transaction. So that's really limiting. So we've got the block size limit, and these transactions have to go into it. So on average, how many of the smart contract transactions can fit into a block at the moment?
Well, right now we mostly hit size limits, and it depends, right? The maximum right now is 16 kilobytes. And I think a lot of smart contract transactions on Cardano end up coming pretty close to that, especially with these sort of scooper or batcher sort of transactions that a lot of DeFi is using right now. You end up wanting to have these very large transactions. So you'll only ever get, about 4 or 5 of those transactions in a block, assuming there's no other activity. And then you'll have a lot of very, very small say 1 kilobyte or less transactions of just people sending funds to each other, right? But what we'd like to see is smart contract transactions that aren't all that much larger than me sending funds directly to you. We shouldn't see that massive difference in size. And so we should be able to open up and access sort of more of the resources available within a block this way.
Okay. All right. This sounds all really good, but what's the impact, and what will DeFi look like then after all of this work has been done and the hard fork is implemented? How would the whole DeFi landscape change? Because I'm pretty excited. Like, this image that you're painting, a lot more transactions.
It's not going to be a flashpoint where everything changes, but I think what you're going to see, there's a whole host of companies. Some of them are members of the CDA who've wanted to release more complex DeFi systems, be it collateralized debt positions, stable coins, a bunch of other, just oracles want to launch. And this really, they've been waiting on this event. So now I think you're going to see sort of over the second half of this year, you're just going to see more products being able to launch, really, at its core. Like, I wish I could say, oh, there's a bunch of things that are going to launch the day after this hard fork lands. I think developers are finally going to have the tools to launch products that have been in the works for a long, long time.
Now it's giving developers the ability to write much more complex scripts as opposed to this 16 kilobyte limit. So how much space do they need to write these scripts? How complex are they getting?
Well, I would say typically just using sort of default Plutus, the way it comes, you're actually going to bump into these limits quite quickly if you're trying to build a production grade application. So, I mean, you can see it from what's happened in about the 10 months since Plutus originally launched last September, right? So we have NFT marketplaces launching. Eventually we got some DEXs launching, and that turns out to about be the limit of what can be fit, because we have really experienced developers working to build up these, and a lot of them are able to just barely get a DEX to work on chain, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's any fault of like anybody involved, whether it's the developers or the business owners. I think the reality is that just happened to be arbitrarily where that line was drawn. And there's even actually been some increases to certain limits to make it so that DEXs can operate more freely on chain without creating congestion. And then it just so happens that something like a stablecoin is maybe 2 or 3 times more complex than a DEX. Just in terms of the like, you have liquidations, you have a DEX. It's really just trying to find ways to avoid price manipulation between a swap. So there's not a lot of different interactions there. But when you think about a stablecoin, it's at least twice as many ways that a user is going to work with a stablecoin. And it was while working on a stablecoin, as well, working at Cardano, that folks who worked at MLABS, as well as another company, Plutarch, built up this language, Plutarch, that we work with quite a bit now. And the nice thing about Plutarch, it's a little bit more complex to work with than standard Plutus. However, you do end up with about a 4x savings in not just space, but also memory and CPU, which are also very limited on chain. So that's something that we've been working on. It's difficult to wield, but it has allowed us to ship a lot of products that just couldn't fit on chain otherwise.
A 4x improvement is huge, really, in this space. So when everything's trying to move on chain and you're getting that much more optimization out of it, it's absolutely fantastic. Can you talk a little bit more about it? Like, we talked about it in our last conversation, but like, let's dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So Plutarch, actually, it's grown quite a bit since our last conversation. So Plutarch is actually now a little bit more of a general purpose way to generate code. And one of the ways, the main way that it generates code, is to generate code that runs on chain. So you can think of Plutarch as a more complicated way to write Haskell, but what it gives you then is a way to generate a bunch of different targets. So you might actually want some parts of the logic to integrate maybe in JavaScript or in Haskell, or in some other languages, maybe eventually Java, where you can have the things that need to go on chain. You're going to send them on chain from off chain as a developer from a website, and be able to make sure that the seam going on chain is really smooth and that it's easy to find if there's a problem when you're trying to interact with a smart contract. So you might actually build up both the on-chain and the off-chain in Plutarch. Mostly these days, what we're doing is we're building up the on-chain in Plutarch, and we're using some pieces to sort of bridge between Plutarch and the browser, right? But fundamentally, Plutarch can target a bunch of different languages. One of the things that it targets is Plutus itself, untyped Plutus core, to run on-chain. And fundamentally, like, we've been adding to it. So one of the things that we've been adding or working on adding is auditability. So there's something that regular Plutus can create that Plutarch originally couldn't. And we really want to make sure that auditors can use this extra information. It's called the PIR, the Plutus Intermediate Representation, with all of their tools. So, and this isn't just going to inform tooling for auditors. It could also inform eventually editor tooling as well, right? So it can give developers a much more efficient way to work with Plutarch, as well as auditors a better way to handle Plutarch, because it is a little bit more complex to read and to work with. And a lot of auditors, say folks at Tweak, they worked on Plutus itself, so they know Plutus already pretty well. Maybe they want to learn Plutarch, and we want to give them all of the tooling that we can to help them with that. And not just Tweak, there's lots of auditors that are probably going to be working with Plutarch in the future.
Yeah.
So this was originally a request that came up from Tweak about their tooling, and we've been adding on to Plutarch. We've been building out helper libraries and all kinds of things for it.
So I heard you guys got a Catalyst proposal around this as well that you're trying to get some funding for to develop this out and build a little bit more. Is this going in line with the future development of it?
Yeah. So specifically, the Catalyst proposal is around moving from Plutus V1 to V2. So that's some of the auditability features that I was talking about, as well as additional backends, I believe.
Gotcha.
So when I talk about a backend, being able to generate extra code that might be used by, say, JavaScript to build up different parts of your application.
Brilliant. Okay. If anyone is wanting to learn more about Plutarch, are there any resources or anywhere to go to actually talk to you guys or anyone else that's using it at the moment to be able to learn a little bit more and convert their actual Plutus scripts now to Plutarch?
So there's a great tutorial already on the Plutarch repository. It's the Plutonomicon on GitHub. And I'll get you a link after the show so you can get it into the description and the show notes. So that's the first way. Now, from that repository, you should be able to find a link to the Discord. So there's actually a Plutonomicon Discord that you can join to get support from the developers, not just of Plutarch, but of a few different platforms, including the Cardano Transaction Library as well. So there's lots of different ways to get support there. And I would say that I think there's also another proposal that we have that includes building even better tutorials and courses around it. So we're also looking at doing a documentation drive as well.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so important. To bring in more developers, you need all those documentations out there so people can follow through and actually learn and adopt things. And you also mentioned a Cardano Transaction Library as well. And I saw another Catalyst proposal around that. Can you talk about that and what you're trying to do there? It's a whole bunch of more tooling that you guys are building.
So this Cardano Transaction Library is actually one that we've been working on with IOG, and we've made a few applications to Catalyst because we want to move faster to provide more to the community than we possibly can on the budget that we have right now. So we've reached out, and this time around, what we really want to do, we've been working with Ogmios, and we have an Ogmios integration set up right now. Ogmios is one way to query what's going on chain. So if we talked earlier about these bits of state that you might need to build up a transaction, this is a tool for getting those bits of state.
Right, gotcha.
Now, another tool for getting them, and one that's actually really popular, it's used by all of the light wallets, is Blockfrost.
Yeah.
So this proposal is actually to add Blockfrost as an alternative sort of runtime system for the CTL. So to sort of tie that together and what it's going to do, CTL is there to help developers write sort of mini libraries for interacting on chain, so that a front-end developer can wire that up to buttons and form fields on a web page, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what this is essentially going to do is it'll allow them to be a little bit more flexible about which way they are able to get the information from the blockchain without changing any of their code. So it's sort of going to give you the ability to sort of switch back and forth between these two different formats, Blockfrost or RugMeDaddy, these two different services. One you might be running on your own, but what this is really going to do, it's going to allow you to just grab a Blockfrost API and start writing CTL without setting up a whole bunch of infrastructure, without running your own node, and get a lot of the benefits, essentially the same experience that you would get if you were running all of your own backend infrastructure. And I'm really hoping either Blockfrost eventually goes fully open source, or we actually see like a decentralized registry of services of people running these APIs, SPOs, that hopefully you can sort of have the best of both worlds and not have to run your own services, but essentially have something you can connect up to a private testnet, or have something that's distributed so that you're not, at risk if, AWS decides tomorrow there's no more crypto on AWS or something.
That sounds really cool. I'm a big user of Blockfrost myself, building plugins and whatnot that connects to Blockfrost. So we've got Callus proposals in the Blockfrost challenge as well. So having something like that and options, absolutely brilliant. And I love this idea of SPOs being able to run some of the code and have a decentralized API access to the chain, and having that infrastructure there for other people to use. That's really cool idea as well. Really cool concept. Absolutely brilliant.
It's not my idea. I can't take credit for it. Maybe you've had them on the show. Freeloaders?
Oh, no, I haven't yet. I had no idea.
You should get them on. So freeloaders are currently doing this with a submit API.
Yeah.
That's where I got the idea from. But I would really like to see it with like a broader set of APIs.
Yeah. One of our endpoints is with the provided a submit API out behind their load balancers, and then you just connect to that and it shows which one is best optimized for you, and away it goes. So that's absolutely brilliant. So cool. A deeper extension of that. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'd really like to see that, but the whole idea is really right now. That's maybe a little ways off. Right now, I'd really like to just see people get the option of Blockfrost and kind of a quick start, or setting up their own infrastructure.
All right. So the future overall sounds really, really cool. I love the some of these proposals that you guys are putting together, and the future development and everything that's going to come out. And with all these changes within the Vasil hard fork and how the DeFi landscape's going to change. Absolutely amazing future that you're painting for Cardano. Any last words that you'd like to say?
I guess what I'll do is I'll do a shout out for the Cardano DeFi Alliance as well. So they've actually got an education proposal out as well for you to take a look at while you're perusing your Catalyst proposals this round. So they're all about doing what you might say like retail facing education. So how is DeFi different than Ethereum? What is DeFi going to look like as it launches on Cardano? Maybe what are some of the legal implications eventually as we sort of unfold what that looks like. So we'd really like to get sort of a setup where we can produce videos, produce podcasts potentially, and help people get a better understanding of how to responsibly engage in DeFi as it launches on Cardano, and maybe some opportunities to discuss things that are really going to be different about DeFi on Cardano versus DeFi on Ethereum. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Ben, for joining me on this podcast. It's a very exciting time to be in the DeFi space on Cardano, watching it grow, blossom, and of course, it's going to be very different to what people are experiencing already in other ecosystems.
Thank you so much for having me.
So once again, huge thank you to Ben for joining me on this episode to talk about the Vasil hard fork and everything around it. We are in the process of upgrading our own stake pool here at ADAOZ and going through that upgrade and ensuring that we have everything in place. I wanted to be able to make sure that we have rollbacks in place just in case anything happened. I know a lot of people upgraded to the last version and had to roll back, and it's a tedious thing to do. You spend all this time upgrading, ensuring that your nodes are perfect, and I wanted to make sure that a rollback process was in place so that we could quickly switch back if we needed to. But from what I've seen in regards to the testing, everything is working perfectly fine and producing blocks as it should, and the community seems to be going ahead with this. You can see from the stats here that the nodes are slowly updating. The first time I looked at this, it was about 12% of the nodes in the Cardano blockchain that had upgraded to the latest one. We're waiting for that 75% mark to pull the trigger and say, we're going ahead with the Vasil hard fork. So very soon, as soon as all the node operators on the network complete their upgrades and move to that latest version that's needed. So we're almost there. Fingers crossed we see that before the end of this month and we can progress to the final stages of this hard fork combinator event. All right, that's it for me for this episode. If you got something out of it, if you really enjoyed it, consider giving me that thumbs up, click subscribe, click the notification bell, and you will hear more from me real soon.
Yeah, gotta do it like that. You've been listening to the Learn Cardano podcast. Gotta get it hype. Crypto is what we like, but this is not investment or financial advice. Gotta do your research, cause it's risky. We know it is. This show is educational and it's informative. Crypto's the future, really, it ain't no debate.